Hey, today we're going to be doing a score breakdown of the music I made for the Heathens trailer. Heathens is a new animated series being made by Studio Psycho. We're currently crowdfunding our pilot episodes, so if you like what you hear, consider making a donation to the project using the Kickstarter link in the description. I'll also link to the original trailer so you can check out how this music fits in with the visuals. Before we dig too far into this, let's just take a listen to the track so we know what we're going to be getting into. All right, fun stuff. So let's just start from the top of the project and work our way down. This is the section where I've got all the keys. You'll see I've got two different types of pianos in here. I've got Adam Monroe's Honky Tonk piano, which is like a really nice, warbly, upright piano. You can hear a bit of that here. I love this. Is not the cleanest piano in the world, which is kind of why I like it. It has like a lot of character. And then there's also this cabaret piano that's used, which again it's sort of supposed to be like a saloon piano. So the tuning is just like there's slight discrepancies. You get like a little bit of warble, but it's got a nice sound to it. You'll notice that I've split the piano into a bunch of different chunks here. Part of that is just because compositionally it makes things a little bit easier to like see the different sections, but a lot of times I'll also end up EQing things slightly differently. So let's say in these bass notes, I want some of like the low tones, but I might not need as much of the actual like attack or the sparkle on those notes specifically, but I do want to retain those in the melody. So if I split them up, I can EQ them slightly differently. But really, essentially, it's just the same piano part. And then I use that cabaret piano because it's got a slightly different color to the honky tonk piano, and I doubled that da-da-ba-ba line just to give it like a little bit more oomph. You see how it kind of opens up a little bit there and kind of gives it like a little bit more heft because you really want it ba-da-ba-boom. Down here, you'll see I've got two reverse samples. These are essentially the same thing. However, they're just slightly different colors. Sometimes when I go back and forth between two different sounds, I'm not really sure which one works better. I'll end up blending the two. So you can see here that the Adam Monroe Honky Tonk piano takes center stage because I wanted to keep that rough and tumble kind of saloon vibe. But then I've got this giant, what they call the giant piano, because it's supposed to be just an absolutely huge upright piano. And this has a little bit more of a crisp, kind of focused sound. I was hoping it was going to add a little bit more clarity to the Adam Monroe piano. So let's just hear the first sample. It's nice. And then we hear the second sample. You see, it's got like a little bit more clarity. So when you mix the two together, it's got pretty much exactly the sound that I want, and that helps lead right into that next section. So you start off with like the slow kind of plodding intro, and then the reverse samples kind of like build up intensity, and then we're off to the races. And then I've got a Hammond B3 sample. This is actually just the stock Hammond B3 that comes in Logic. It sounds pretty good for most cases. And this just kind of helps add a pad to the background. So all the keys together, this is what we get. Moving right along, we'll go down to the percussion next. These are cymbal swells. I end up using those a lot to kind of help glue sections together. Sometimes it really helps propel into the next section, or if you just need to take one section and create more of a buffer. I've got 3 different tambourines on this track. This Teoh Sonique tambourine is made by my friend Gregory Jenkins, who made a really awesome sample pack. So this is a MIDI instrument. And it's a pretty dry sample. So I like it because it's got a lot of clarity. These other 2, the live wood tambourine and live plastic tambourine, are both live recordings. This wood tambourine has got like a really rusty kind of jangly sound to it. It sounds almost more like a shaker. But it's got a lot of character to it. And then this plastic tambourine is actually made for a drum kit. You're supposed to attach it to, let's say, like a hi-hat, or you can put it on a kick drum pedal and play it that way. I usually just end up shaking it, but it's got like much more of a jingle to it, a little bit more of a brighter sound. And I will almost always end up using both of these together, and I'll pan them like left and right just to be able to get like that combination of sound. I feel like it's the best of both worlds. And then I mix the Teoh Sonique tambourine in there as well, just to give it a little bit more clarity. So altogether, that sounds like this. What we're going to see coming up a lot in this track is there's a lot of discrepancies in time, which help give things like a little bit more of a fatness. It also helps create a little bit of stereo separation, especially when things are panned left and right. And when you're trying to capture that garage rock type sound, I feel like getting a little bit sloppy with performances is kind of part of the whole aesthetic. Like if it's too clean and precise, it doesn't sound right. So I've got a handful of stomp samples here too, so I can kind of just whack away at the keyboard and get these stompy sounds. The initial stomps, this is just panned straight down the center. And it's a little bit softer. I ended up rolling off some of the highs on there and used a multi-band compressor to kind of like pull off a little bit of the attack, so it's a little less sharp. Then when the track really kicks into gear, it switches to these 2 tracks that are hard panned left and right. The first chunk I ended up trying to align to the grid a little bit better. The second one I just kind of like whacked away. And as you'll see, if I open this up, the attacks aren't super precise. Like, they're generally around the same area, but having a little bit of that flam really makes a difference. Kind of makes it feel like there's like a bunch of factory workers or something, which fits the aesthetic just fine. Same trick was used with the claps. These help reinforce the snare drum, which we'll get to later. You hear that flam, like it's not exactly precise, and that just kind of makes it feel a little bit fatter. So skipping down a little bit further into the score, this is a tom sample that has been reversed. I stole this idea from Brad Breek. He had mentioned that he used this in the intro to Gravity Falls, which I thought was like the coolest idea ever. Like I've reversed piano samples and I had reversed cymbals and stuff like that, but I had never considered doing something like this with a tom. But it does add like a really nice like check it out. So that's another way to kind of like build up some intensity, or to, if you need to like charge into another section, it just kind of like builds an excitement in a really quick way. So this next thing is a white noise sample that I initially made to be like a crash cymbal. It's got like a really sharp decay on it and then a bit of a tail. And then I reversed this. So it's like a reverse cymbal, but it's white noise instead. And you just get like a little less of that metallic jangle that you would get in an actual cymbal. I really like using like simple wave synthesis sometimes to mix in with more organic sounds. Like I love sine waves, I love square waves, saw waves, and white noise. Most of the synthesis that I do tends to start from like really simple waveforms. And that's just because I started off synthesis like doing chiptune stuff. So next up, I've got a double shaker. This is, I mean, pretty much what it sounds like. It's one of these guys. It's like 2 shakers. They're tied together with a band. So all together, this is our percussion ensemble. let's plod along. Not a whole lot going on in the mallet section. This is just some orchestral chimes. I've got two different sample sets. One is a typical set of orchestral chimes. The other one is a very low chime set, and I needed this kind of sound almost like a funeral bell at the very end. So the regular chime sounds like this. And we're just playing on root tones. But then the final chime is a little bit bassier. It's a little more resonant. It sounds a little bit bigger. It's got like a sense of finality to it. All right, so next up, we're going to move right along to the drums. This first kit is pretty much where everything is wrapped around. This is like the main meat and potatoes. It's a kit that has a lot of room reverberation into it, and then I added a ton of like tube distortion to it, so it's got like a really fat crunch to it. And again, give it like a bit more of like a trashy sound. And then like I did with the pianos earlier, I ended up splitting off the hi-hats and put those into their own track. Just so I can have a little bit more control of exactly where they sit in the mix and how you tame some of the peaks and all that. And then most of the rest of these drums are kind of used to blend colors. This is like just a basic kick drum. And this is way more subdued. This is used at the beginning of the track when things need to kind of sit a little bit back before we really kick into high energy gear. This next one is used to add like a little bit more body. And it also adds a harder edge to the attack of the drum because this one gets a little bit mushy in the mix. So I needed something with a little bit more of like a... And then I also reinforced the snare, doing something similar. This one's got like a little bit more of like a crisp edge to it. It just kind of gives that snare drum up top a little bit more click to it. So if we listen to these, we can kind of see how the colors start blending together. Which kind of sounds weird when you add them one at a time, but when you listen to the whole thing from scratch, you really don't hear them as independent sounds. And then down here, I also doubled that kick with a tom sound just because I needed a little bit more, like I needed the pitch to be just slightly higher. I didn't want to pitch the actual bass drum up on its own because it still needed to occupy that lower area, but I needed something to fill out like the higher end of the frequency spectrum a little bit more. And then this tom trick is something that I use quite often. So whenever I need like a bombastic, like blah, 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 I'll usually track like a tom and then try to do it again, but like play it a little bit sloppier. And then I'll end up panning them left and right. So you get like this fatter sort of gluck, 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 gluck. That's the technical term for it. It's a gluck, 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 gluck. It's a little bombastic. If it's just one, it kind of sounds a little bit too clean and comes across a little bit more of like an 80s stadium rock sound. Like I want something a little more garagey, something that's kind of like a little messier. And then again, in a similar way that I had in the percussion, I also used a reverse tom. I honestly couldn't tell you why I put one in the percussion and one down here. I think in my head when I was crafting these, I had different purposes in mind. Again, if I was better at mixing, I probably would have consolidated these, but sometimes when you have to work quickly, you just gotta like go, do whatever it takes. I honestly wasn't expecting that anybody was going to see any of this stuff, so you all get to revel in my shame. And then when we put everything together, and as you see, I also use that reverse tom trick again to like lead right into the last bomb. If you don't have that, it loses a little bit of its punch. See? All right, so moving on to the basses, I've got two different bass tracks. This top one, live bass intro, this is a P bass with flat wound strings. And the next one, the body, is like a jazz bass track with round wound strings, and it's got some distortion added to it. And this is just to separate those two sections. So the first part is a little bit more mellow, and then when we move into the second part, it's got like a little bit more grit and thunder. You'll see that each of these tracks were recorded in chunks as opposed to a full bass track, and that's largely because when you're working on cues for production, a lot of the times they go through several revisions, and instead of having to re-record everything from scratch, which tends to waste a lot of time, it's oftentimes easier just to like clip things and add things here and there. So you'll see this was recording number 1, but this one is recording number 15, and this track went through several different versions before we finally settled on this is the one. And then I've also got like a reverse bass sample here. Let's just listen to the P bass and see how that sounds. And I rolled the tone knob off on the actual guitar itself to kind of give it a little bit more of a mellow sound. And then I took a bass sample and I reversed it because, again, I needed to kind of create this sucking motion to move forward into the next, into the blackout, and then bam. As again, it's not phenomenal on its own, but when you mix it with other stuff, it adds to that forward trajectory, like. And then we've got the jazz bass section, which I'm calling the body because this is like the body of the composition, I guess. Intro versus body. And this has got like a heavy pick on it, so you get more of that grit and attack, and the strings kind of rattle against the frets a little bit, a little more dirt. And you might hear like some of the volume ducking. That's because this is sidechained to some of the kick drums. So whenever the two trigger together, the bass will duck out of the way and you'll be able to hear the kick, but you won't really notice it in context. And that just kind of helps these sounds slot together a little bit more. Otherwise, the frequencies will fight each other. This sub bass I'm not going to play because it's really hard to hear, but these are basically just super low sine waves that help reinforce the low end of the bass guitar. They're really there to be felt more than heard, so believe me that they're there, but for a reason, but there's no reason to play them because you really can't hear them all that well. Next, we've got the guitar section. This probably took the most amount of work because this is very guitar-centric. As you can see, there's a lot of guitar tracks, and most of these guitar tracks were either double-tracked, some of them were quadruple-tracked. I've got one that's got like 8 tracks in it, and this is just because I needed to create like this giant sound. There's a lot of layers. Some of it you can hear just through speakers. A lot of it is ear candy. So if you put on headphones, you'll be able to hear some of the more detailed parts kind of like coming in and out through headphones, but we'll go through it. So this first part is a slide guitar with a pick. I recorded the slide guitar twice, once with a pick and once with my fingers. The pick has a little bit more of an attack to it. And you can hear I EQ'd out like a lot of the low and mid stuff. And then I did the same thing with fingers. So I get like a little bit more of the body with the fingers, but I still needed a little bit more of the edge of the attack with the pick. So when you mix them together, you get the best of both worlds. I get a little bit more of the attack from the pick, and I get more of the sustain and body from the finger style. And then I added these harmonics. These didn't pop out in the mix nearly as well as I wanted them to, and at some point it kind of became a lost cause, but these are supposed to add a little bit more air. I love harmonics. I think they sound so cool. Next, I've got muted strums. These are just like, I really just mute the strings. I use a very light pick, and this is just to get like a chugga 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 chugga. Kind of using the guitar as a percussive instrument. And then for the intro, let's just skip down here. I've got this Jaguar guitar that was recorded using like this octave motif. But then I felt like it lost some of its oomph. So I recorded just the tonics, like the bass notes, by themselves as well. Use a slightly grittier distortion, something that's a little bit more lo-fi, so then mix together. So for that intro section, these are all the guitar parts. This is just that da-da-ba-ba-bum, but it's recorded once on low strings on the acoustic guitar and once on high. A little slight bend there. And that's played in other places as well, but I just think having that in the acoustic guitar adds a little bit more grit. Like, I love acoustic guitar melodies. Then we've got these Telecaster power chords. I tend to set my action on my Telecaster pretty low, which means if I really like spank the strings, they vibrate against the frets a little bit and give it like a snap and kind of like a dirty sound. I really like that. Like, some people end up setting it a little bit higher so they can get a cleaner sound, but I usually reach for the Tele when I want like a little bit more twang, a little bit more buzz, a little bit more grit. And this is tracked like a lot, I think. Let me see. Yeah, so I've got 4 tracks here, and then they're all panned. Like, I think these 2 parts are panned like hard left, hard right. These are panned like a little bit less, so we really fill up this space here. A little bit of slap back delay on there and some reverb as well. And then I've got a glass slide part. This is also tracked several times, so I think it's again another 4 times. And I have some of them are recorded higher on the register and some lower, so it just kind of creates this like moving like. And I mean, it helps add a little bit of tension and motion to what is otherwise a really simple chord progression. Those 2 together. And then I've got a slide guitar. This was originally a lot more prominent in one of the earlier versions. This is the same melody that's played on piano that we heard earlier. The piano initially wasn't there, and it was this with a lot more distortion. It was higher in the register, but it was determined that this was kind of whiny sounding. So I ended up re-recording it with no distortion or saturation and just kind of mixed it a lot lower. And then I copied that riff up in the Telecaster a little bit sloppily. And then also in this next Tele part, I also got that meow. Just kind of add a little bit more twang to what is already playing in the piano part. And then down here I've got some Fender Jaguar recordings. And that's the same part that the bass is playing, but I just needed a little bit more definition on the actual bass sound. So I EQ'd out some of the lows, I added a little bit of saturation, so it'll kind of cut through the mix and reinforce that. All right. And then this Jaguar lead. So this was an attempt to dirty up that lead line that was originally in the guitar. Again, most of that is being carried by the piano, but this helps add a little bit of grit to that. All right, this next part I called the banjo ostinato, and this is because originally there was a banjo in this recording. It was determined that the banjo kind of made it sound a little bit too plinky, a little bit too Appalachian, I guess. So we ended up getting rid of it because we wanted to have something with a little more heft, a little bit more darkness to it, because these are demons. But this is that same part played in the guitar. So you can imagine that the banjo would it just adds a little bit of drive. So then later on, towards the end of this section, there's a part where the trailer goes into like this quick montage cut. And to do that, we need like to have like this cacophony and just a lot of like wild sounds. So one of these is just like a glass slide that's kind of like going wheel, 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 wheel. And then I did another take where I muted the strings and just kind of like scratched them with my fingernails. So you're like, and then the other one, the last one was I used an Allen key. This is something that I stole from Rage Against the Machine from back in the day, but it's just like an Allen wrench and just kind of scrape the metal against the strings to get like a wah, 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 wah. And at the end, it's like meow. And then I ended up recording some feedback here as well. So we get this. And then jumping down here to the synth section, this is really the only thing that was synthesized aside from the white noise stuff that I was talking about earlier and some of the sine wave stuff that just helps support some of the instruments. This is just a straight white noise sample that I think I generated like in Audacity or something, or maybe Amadeus. I don't really remember. This is a while ago. But I use white noise all the time for different stuff. And I had mentioned before that I'll use it sometimes just to like reinforce sections. So this is just a sample that I layered underneath all the guitar noise to kind of make it feel a little bit more like, I don't know, give it a little bit more weight. And then finally, this last section, it's called sub bass. It's not really sub bass in this case. It's just kind of how I organize my projects. This is all based on a typical orchestral template that's got a bunch of other stuff. This is a trick that I use on a lot of scores. I ended up writing a script that limits the velocity of any notes that come into the MIDI keyboard to like a very, very low range. I think it's like something like limits it to like 15 or something like that. I mean, it goes up to 127 if you don't know MIDI programming, but so it limits the velocity to 15, which means that each note, even no matter how hard I hit the keyboard, it's going to play like really quietly. Like it only allows those articulations to happen quietly. And the cool thing is, if you've ever worked with a piano, if you hit a note very softly, it's got like this really like ghostly resonance to it. So in order to bring that up to audible levels and also like get a lot of sustain, I'd put a ton of limiters on this and just cranked the gain at each level, then added another limiter, cranked the gain, add another limiter, cranked the gain, but then also like made sure that the threshold was set such that it would never really overload. And then I'm able to have basically just like long sustained tones that evolve over time. So if I used a synth, it would just be flat. But in this case, it changes a little bit and yet remains pretty steady. You'll see the note has a little bit of shape to it. I mean, that was one of my professors in school said, you know, no drone is just a drone. You got to figure out ways to activate it. So it's got to have some sort of sense of movement. And I think trying to figure out ways to confront that is like a really interesting creative challenge musically. All right, so that's basically it. And then when you put all the parts together, so there you have it. I hope you enjoyed the score breakdown. I hope I didn't blather on for too long. If you like what you hear, please check out the trailer. Again, I'll have a link in the description below. And if you really like what you hear and you see, you should please think about contributing to our Kickstarter campaign. As of the time that I'm making this video, we have funded about 80% of our goal. So we still need that extra 20%, and we have about 2 weeks. So help us make this happen. I'd love to write more music and show you guys what we can do. Thanks.